Hello, Virgo. Normal is consensus reality enforced through repetition until deviation feels dangerous. And when you label something not normal, when you declare a connection exceptional, when you claim mutual recognition of that exceptionality, you're doing several things simultaneously. You're elevating experience above ordinary. You're creating specialness through language. You're justifying whatever comes next by framing it as inevitable consequence of this supposedly unique bond. Mm. But mostly you're avoiding examining whether the connection is actually exceptional or just intense, avoiding questioning whether both people genuinely recognize its supposedly special nature, or whether one person has convinced themselves of mutual awareness that doesn't actually exist. Avoiding responsibility for what happens next by attributing it to the connection's nature rather than to choices being made. Because here's uncomfortable reality about connections labeled not normal. Sometimes they genuinely are different, deeper, more aligned, more resonant. Sometimes two people do recognize something unusual in how they relate, how they understand each other, how they fit together in ways that don't fit the standard template. But sometimes not normal just means dysfunctional, means enmeshed, means intense in ways that feel significant but are actually just activating old wounds, recreating familiar patterns, mistaking recognition of trauma for recognition of soulmate. And distinguishing between those two versions of not normal, that requires honesty most people aren't willing to bring, requires examining whether exceptional connection is actually exceptional or just exception to healthy relating, requires asking whether this feels different because it's profound or because it's problematic. But those questions threaten the narrative, threaten the specialness, threaten the justification for whatever this is next is going to be. So they don't get asked, don't get examined, don't get honestly considered, because considering them might reveal that not normal isn't the compliment it's being framed as. Left eyelid twitching in rhythm, I can't control or predict. You both now know this. Claimed mutual awareness, asserted that recognition is shared, understanding is bilateral. Both people are equally aware of the connection's supposedly exceptional nature. But how do you know what both people know? How do you determine that awareness is genuinely mutual rather than projected? How do you verify that other person recognizes same exceptionality you're recognizing rather than simply responding to your intensity with their own version of engagement that might mean something completely different? You don't, you can't, you assume, you interpret, you decide that because you feel something profound, because connection feels exceptional to you, because you've labeled it not normal. The other person must be experiencing identical recognition, identical awareness, identical sense of this being different from standard connections. But people experience same connection differently. What feels profound to you might feel pleasant to them. What seems exceptional to you might seem interesting to them. What you're calling not normal, they might be experiencing as unusual, but not necessarily significant. Or they might be experiencing their own version of not normal that has nothing to do with what you're experiencing and everything to do with their own patterns, their own wounds, their own habitual ways of relating that feel intense but aren't actually healthy, and claiming you both know this, claiming mutual recognition, claiming shared awareness. That's assertion, not verification. That's deciding what someone else experiences and then acting as if that decision is fact. That's projecting your experience onto someone else and then treating that projection as mutual understanding, which becomes problem when this is next appears, when whatever comes next gets justified by mutual recognition that might not actually be mutual, when actions get taken based on claimed shared awareness that might only exist in one person's interpretation of the situation. Because if you both actually know this, if recognition is genuinely mutual, if awareness is truly shared, then presumably you're communicating about it, discussing it, explicitly naming what you're both experiencing and verifying that experiences align, not just assuming, not just interpreting behavior as confirmation, actually talking about whether this connection is exceptional and what that exceptionality means and what both people want to do about it. But explicit communication doesn't appear in this title, just claimed mutual knowing, just asserted shared recognition, just declared bothness without any indication that verification has occurred through actual conversation rather than assumption based on interpretation of behavior. Molars grinding against each other, creating pressure that radiates through skull. This is not a normal connection. Let's examine what normal connection actually means. Standard relating, typical patterns, ways people usually connect that follow established templates, friendship that looks like other friendships, romance that follows familiar arc, professional relationship that maintains appropriate boundaries, family connection that operates within expected parameters. And normal isn't bad. Normal is often healthy. Normal frequently works. Normal provides framework that helps people navigate relating without having to reinvent interaction every single time. Normal creates predictability that feels safe, that allows trust to build gradually, that doesn't require constant intensity to maintain significance. But normal is also boring to people addicted to intensity. Normal feels insufficient to people who mistake drama for depth. Normal seems inadequate to people who've learned to equate healthy relating with lack of passion and passionate relating with dysfunction. So they seek not normal, they chase exceptional. They label connections as different, special, beyond standard categories, and sometimes that labeling is accurate recognition of genuine, unusual resonance. But often it's just reframing of dysfunction as profundity, just repackaging of unhealthy patterns as evidence of special bond. Just mistaking intensity created by mutual wounding for intensity created by unusual compatibility. Because not normal can mean transcendent, can mean two people operating at level of honesty and vulnerability that's rare, can mean connection that genuinely doesn't fit standard templates because both people are bringing something authentic and unusual to the relating. But not normal can also mean toxic, can mean enmeshed, can mean codependent, can mean dramatic, can mean unstable, can mean intense in ways that feel significant short term but unsustainable long term, can mean different not because it's better but because it's worse. different because it's violating healthy boundaries, different because it's recreating trauma patterns, different because it's mistaking recognition of familiar dysfunction for recognition of destined partnership. And which version of not normal is this? Which version are you experiencing? Which version are you calling exceptional while potentially ignoring signs that exceptional just means exceptionally problematic? You won't know without honesty, without examining whether different means better or just means different, without questioning whether not normal is compliment or warning, without considering whether you're recognizing genuine, unusual connection or just recognizing familiar pattern dressed up as special bond. Inner thighs trembling like muscles are trying to hold position they can't maintain much longer. So, this is next. Consequence, inevitable progression, natural development that follows from recognition of exceptional connection, presented as given, as obvious as what must happen now that supposedly mutual awareness has been established. But what is next? Title doesn't say, doesn't specify, doesn't tell you what follows from this not normal connection that you both supposedly recognize. Just implies that something comes next. Something determined by the connection's nature rather than by choices being made. Something that's consequence of what is rather than decision about what to do. And that framing matters because presenting next as natural consequence removes agency, removes choice, removes responsibility. If this is next, if it's determined by connection's exceptional nature, if it follows inevitably from mutual recognition, then you're not choosing it. It's just happening. It's just what comes next when connection is this unusual. But that's not true. That's abdication of agency disguised as surrender to destiny. That's avoiding responsibility for choices by attributing them to connection's nature. That's pretending something is happening to you rather than acknowledging you're making it happen through decisions you're responsible for. Because next is always choice, always decision, always something you do rather than something that happens. Even if choice feels obvious, feels inevitable, feels like only possible response to exceptional connection, it's still choice, still decision you're making, still action you're responsible for, regardless of whether connection is normal or exceptional or anywhere in between. And removing that agency, pretending choice is consequence, framing decision as natural progression, that's dangerous. That's how people justify actions they haven't fully examined. That's how they do things they haven't consciously chosen. That's how they end up in situations they didn't intend because they were following what seemed like natural next step rather than actively deciding whether that step serves them. So, what actually is next? What are you about to do? What choice are you about to make while telling yourself it's just natural consequence of exceptional connection? And are you willing to own that choice? To take responsibility for it? To acknowledge it's decision you're making rather than something that's just happening because connection is supposedly not normal? Because if you can't own it, if you have to frame it as inevitable consequence, if you need to pretend it's happening rather than admitting you're choosing it, maybe that's information. Maybe that signal that what's next isn't actually aligned with your values. Maybe that's indication you're about to do something you haven't fully examined because you're too invested in narrative of exceptional connection to question whether next step serves you or just serves the drama. Sacrum feeling like it's trying to separate from rest of spine, creating gap that shouldn't exist. Connection, that word, that concept. What does it actually mean when two people connect? What's happening that creates sense of connection versus disconnection? And what makes one connection different from another beyond intensity, beyond feeling, beyond subjective sense that this one is exceptional? Connection is resonance, frequency alignment. Two people operating on compatible wavelengths that allows communication, understanding, relating to flow more easily than it does with others who operate on different frequencies. And that resonance, that alignment, it's real, it's measurable, it's something that genuinely varies between different relationships. But resonance isn't destiny. Alignment isn't proof of meant to be-ness. Connection isn't evidence of special bond that transcends normal relating. Sometimes you resonate with people because you're both healthy and compatible. Sometimes you resonate with people because you're both unhealthy in complementary ways. Sometimes you connect easily because you're genuinely aligned. Sometimes you connect easily because you're recreating familiar dysfunction. And distinguishing between those requires discernment, requires examining not just that connection exists, but what kind of connection it is. Requires asking whether resonance is happening because both people are operating from wholeness or because both people are operating from wounds that fit together in ways that feel intense but aren't actually healthy. Because wounded people connect with wounded people all the time, recognize each other's trauma, fit together in their dysfunction, create intense relating based on mutual wounding that feels profound because it's familiar, because it's triggering old patterns, because it's activating attachment systems in ways that feel like destiny but are really just repetition. And that connection, that resonance, it's not normal, it's exceptional. It's intense in ways that standard healthy relating isn't. It feels significant. It seems profound. Both people recognize something unusual in how they relate. But unusual doesn't mean good. Intense doesn't mean healthy. Exceptional doesn't mean sustainable. And connection based on mutual wounding, on complementary dysfunction, on recognition of familiar patterns. That connection might feel more significant than connection based on actual compatibility, but it won't last, won't nourish, won't serve either person's growth. We'll just recreate same dynamics that didn't work before in new relationship that feels exceptional until it becomes obviously problematic. So when you claim this is not a normal connection, when you assert both people recognize this exceptionality, when you prepare for whatever is next, examine what kind of exception you're experiencing. Examine what's creating the resonance. Examine whether unusual means unusually healthy or unusually dysfunctional. Examine whether not normal is compliment or warning. Because both exist, both feel exceptional, both create sense that this connection is different, but only one version serves you. Only one version builds something sustainable. Only one version creates relating that nourishes rather than depletes. Fingernails suddenly too long, feeling like they don't belong to hands they're attached to. You both now know this, so this is next. Cause and effect, if then logic. Because both people recognize exceptional nature of connection Therefore, something specific follows, natural progression, inevitable consequence. What must happen now that awareness is established? Except awareness doesn't create obligation. Recognition doesn't determine response. Knowing connection is exceptional doesn't prescribe what comes next. You still get to choose, still get to decide, still get to determine whether exceptional connection leads to deeper engagement or conscious distance or anything in between. Because sometimes recognizing connection is exceptional means pursuing it. Sometimes it means protecting it by going slowly. Sometimes it means acknowledging it while choosing not to act on it because timing is wrong or circumstances are complicated or one or both people aren't available in ways that would allow healthy development. Recognition doesn't equal action. Awareness doesn't equal commitment. Knowing something is different doesn't mean different equals right or right equals now or now equals whatever you're about to do while pretending it's natural consequence rather than active choice. So, before you proceed to next, before you follow supposed inevitability of progression, before you do whatever you're about to do, pause, question, examine. Ask whether next actually follows from recognition or whether next is just what you want to do and you're using recognition as justification. Ask whether both people actually agree on what next is or whether one person has decided and is assuming the other will go along. Ask whether next serves both people or just serves intensity, drama, continuation of pattern that feels exceptional but might be problematic. And if you can't pause, if questioning feels threatening, if examining what's next seems like betrayal of exceptional connection, maybe that's information. Maybe that urgency, that rush to next, that inability to slow down and verify that both people are actually on same page about what's happening. Maybe that signal that what feels exceptional is actually just familiar dysfunction, creating false sense of inevitable progression towards something that hasn't been consciously chosen by both people. Because healthy connections, even exceptional ones, can withstand examination, can tolerate questioning, can handle slowing down to verify mutual understanding before proceeding. Unhealthy connections, even ones that feel profound, can't tolerate examination because examination reveals dysfunction. Can't handle questioning because questions expose lack of actual mutual agreement. Can't slow down because slowing down allows space for discernment that might interrupt progression toward next that serves pattern but doesn't serve people. So, which are you in? Which kind of exceptional connection? One that can withstand examination or one that requires rushing to next before consciousness catches up with what's actually happening? Your willingness to pause and honestly examine that question, that's more important than any claimed exceptionality. That's more indicative of whether connection is genuinely unusual in healthy ways or just unusual in intense ways. That's what actually determines whether next serves you or whether next just serves continuation of pattern dressed up as destiny. Entire lower back seized in spasm that creates sensation of being folded in half from inside. This is not a normal connection. You both now know this. So this is next. 3 sentences: creating narrative arc, establishing exceptionality, claiming mutual recognition, declaring inevitable consequence, beginning, middle, end, setup, confirmation, progression, problem, acknowledgement, solution. Except it's not that clean. Real connections, even exceptional ones, are messier. Mutual recognition is harder to verify. Next is more complicated to determine. Nobody's experience of relationship follows neat three-sentence arc from exceptional to mutually recognized to naturally progressing. Real connections require communication, require verification, require both people explicitly discussing what they're experiencing, whether experiences align, what both want to do about it. Real mutual recognition happens through conversation, not through assumption. Real next steps get decided through dialogue, not through declared inevitability. But messy doesn't sell. Complex doesn't activate. Requiring actual communication instead of claimed mutual knowing doesn't create urgency. So you get neat arc. You get three sentences that tell complete story. You get exceptional connection to mutual recognition to inevitable next presented as if that's how relating works, when it's actually not how anything works unless you're in fantasy rather than reality. And believing that fantasy, consuming that narrative, accepting that neat progression as model for your own relating. That's how you end up in situations that seemed inevitable but weren't actually chosen. That's how you do things you haven't examined. That's how you mistake intensity for destiny and pattern for profundity and familiar dysfunction for exceptional connection. So reject the arc, reject the neat progression, reject the claimed inevitability of next, and instead bring messiness, bring communication, bring actual verification of whether both people experience same exceptionality, whether recognition is genuinely mutual, whether next is something both people want rather than something one person is assuming based on interpretation of behavior. That's harder. That's less romantic. That's less suited to three-sentence narrative arc that makes relating seem simple and inevitable and determined by connection's nature rather than by choices being made. But it's real, it's honest, it's what actually creates sustainable connections, whether they're exceptional or ordinary. And sustainable, even if ordinary, serves you better than exceptional that burns bright and fast before revealing itself as just another version of pattern you've been repeating while calling it special each time. Choose sustainability over intensity. Choose communication over assumption. Choose conscious decision over claimed inevitability. Choose messy reality over neat narrative. That's what actually serves connection. Whether it's normal or not, every vertebra feeling like it's grinding against the ones above and below, creating friction throughout entire spine. Truth isn't found in others' stories. It's discovered in your own silence. No predictions, just presence. Stay curious, stay awake.